Since it was a sunny Friday afternoon, I didn't think much of it first. It was 5:30, and I had just returned home from work. When I saw that my neighbor's front door was open, I assumed that she was simply unloading something from her car. I went inside my own house and went through my usual after-work routine, going for a run and then making dinner for my wife, Alice, and me. It was only in the evening that I began to suspect something was wrong. I was taking our dog, Bailey, out for her final walk of the day. It was nautical twilight, my favorite time to be outdoors. I've always enjoyed strolling around the block with Bailey in those last, precious moments when there's still enough light to see the horizon. I put Bailey's harness on her as she excitedly hopped around. Then the two of us stepped out into the cool night. After a few seconds, I looked up and noticed that the door to my neighbor's house, the one directly across the street, was still wide open. Also strange was the fact that, despite her car being in the driveway, the house was completely dark, not a single light on inside. I crossed the street. My neighbor is a 20-something named Isabel. She seems like a sweet girl, but we aren't exactly good friends. Sometimes I give her lemons from our tree in exchange for figs, and that's pretty much the extent of our relationship. Still, the sight of that open door made me uneasy. What if she had some kind of medical emergency and was currently unconscious, or worse, on the floor of her entryway? After a few steps up the driveway, the leash in my hand went taut. Looking down, I saw that Bailey had seated herself firmly on the ground, refusing to budge even as I called her name and tugged on the leash. Her ears were pricked up, her eyes fixed on the house like she was waiting for something. Though she wasn't growling, I was unnerved by her alert posture and her refusal to walk any closer to the door. I let my voice close the distance between us and my neighbor's threshold. "Isabel, it's Brian from across the street. Can you hear me?" For a moment, there was only silence. Then, just as I was about to drop Bailey's leash and walk up the steps to the house, there came a voice from the dark. "Hey, Brian," she said before coughing once and then clearing her throat. "Sorry, I'm in the middle of dinner here. What's up?" I breathed a sigh of relief. "Hey, sorry, I just saw that your front door was open. Wanted to make sure you knew." Strangely, there came another long pause. I knew she was inside the house now, and close enough to the door to hold a conversation with me. "So what was the delay?" "Isabel, oh, you're so sweet to check in. Yes, I know it's open. It's just been so hot today that I wanted to let the breeze in. I'll close it soon." "Of course. Good night then." "You too." With that, I tugged Bailey back down the driveway, and the two of us completed our walk. I returned home, happy that my neighbor was all right, and went to sleep. Saturday was a much-needed lazy day. I woke up at 10, ate the breakfast that Alice made, then spent some time in the backyard with her and Bailey. It was an overcast day, and by 3 p.m. or so, a light rainfall forced us back inside. Alice took a call from her sister, who lives at the edge of our neighborhood, while I went to the living room to throw on some television. Except, before I could get comfortable, I looked out the front window and was surprised to see that Isabel's front door was open again. Open again? I wondered, or was it never shut? I got up close to the window and studied the house across the street. It was so dark inside that the entrance to her house seemed less like a door and more like a black, painted rectangle on the exterior wall. I turned to look at Bailey, who was laying on a nearby couch, and saw that she was also looking out the window. Ears pressed against her head, she glanced at me briefly, then refocused her attention outside. I couldn't tell if she was simply people watching or if, somehow, she too could sense something wrong. Just then, Alice walked into the living room. She was no longer on the phone, and she greeted me with a strange, almost nervous smile. "That was an odd conversation," she said. "I don't know. Clara saw a woman peeking into her house a few nights ago. Creepy, right? Let's make sure we lock up extra well tonight." My thoughts drifted to my neighbor. Alice hesitated for a minute. "It means you gotta take this with a grain of salt." When Alice relayed Clara's description of the woman, I felt a chill run down my spine. Apparently, when she saw that Clara had spotted her, she had given Clara a big smile. Apparently, when she smiled, she had too many teeth. I was silent for a moment. "Love, was Isabel's front door open this morning?" She considered my question as she pet Bailey. "I think it was. If nothing else, I figure I should at least tell Isabel to be careful." I put on my raincoat and headed outside. Once I made it to the sidewalk, I heard frantic barking coming from behind me. Turning around, I saw Bailey in the window, her paws resting on the sill, her growls and whimpers rising over the heavy rain. My wife appeared next to her, giving me a questioning look as she did so. I gave her a shrug in return, then crossed the street. I stopped at the bottom of Isabel's porch steps and listened. Like before, I could hear someone inside. I heard a deep, wet ripping sound like something being torn. A voice called out from the dark interior. "Brian?" "Hello again," I said. "Sorry to bother you again, but I wanted to tell you something. Would you mind coming out for a minute?" "Brian," she repeated, tone almost reprimanding. "This isn't a good time. You always seem to catch me in the middle of a meal." "Isabel, there's been some suspicious activity. Maybe you ought to keep it shut today." "Ah, but I'm so comfortable here on the couch. Why don't you close the door for me?" "The couch? Wasn't she in the middle of a meal? I'll just go inside for a minute. It'll give me some peace of mind to actually see her." I thrust a hand inside, and it disappeared like I'd dipped it in oil. As I groped around for the light switch, my fingers brushed against something solid, something fleshy. "Isabel," I asked the darkness, and then, from inches away, came the sound of laughter. The laugh was deep, gravelly, and mocking. I heard the quick pitter-patter of footsteps running away from me. Again, I stuck my arm inside, and this time I was able to find the light switch. I turned on the light. I turned to the left, walked into the living room, and was greeted by the sight of my neighbor. Or at least, what was left of her. She had been flayed. I staggered out into the rain. It's been days now. I have too many questions. Who the hell was I talking to? How do they sound so perfectly like my neighbor? And why is it that every night since I found the body, Bailey hasn't stopped sitting by the front door and growling? I, 33M, live in Texas with my daughter, Alicia, 8F, and my son, Jay, 4M. Their mom has been out of the picture for the past 2 years, not dead, just a piece of shit, and I've managed pretty well as a single father. The three of us lived in a 2-bedroom in a nice neighborhood. I've got a solid job, and the kids are thankfully healthy. Everything was smooth sailing until one night 2 months ago, during which I was awoken by Jay poking me in the face. He was sobbing violently, though I recognized it as the "I'm afraid" kind of crying as opposed to the "I'm hurt" kind of crying, which made me a little less worried. Jay's always been nightmare prone, so I assumed that's what was causing him distress. When I asked him what was wrong, though, he said, "The man in the next house is making scary faces at me." I'd heard my fair share of Jay's stories about monsters terrorizing him from the dark corners of his bedroom, but this was something new. I assumed he meant our neighbor's house, and the lack of fantastical elements in his description made me uneasy. It felt too specific to be one of his usual nightmares. I got out of bed and walked with Jay and to my kids' room. Alicia was awake in the top bunk. From the soft glow of their nightlight, I could see her crossing her arms and scowling down at her little brother. I didn't turn on any lights to give myself a better view of the outdoors and peered out the bedroom window. One side of the neighbor's house was visible from Alicia and Jay's room. There were 2 windows on that side, but it was too dark inside to see anything. I recalled from the daylight that the window on the left was the kitchen. I wasn't sure what the window on the right was, as it always had its curtains drawn. I asked Alicia if she'd seen anything, and she shook her head. "He's always having nightmares and crying. I don't want to share a room with him anymore, Dad. I never get any sleep. It's not fair." Of course, hearing that made Jay start crying again, so I let him sleep in my room for the night. He has this TMNT indoor camping tent that he prefers to his actual bed. Honestly, at that point, I half suspected his nightmare to be a ploy to get me to let him camp. Anyway, I guess I'm a total pushover because he slept in that tent in my room for the next 2 nights. On the 3rd night, I was again woken up, but this time by Alicia, who was standing over me and shaking my arm. That kid hadn't woken me up in the middle of the night for years. When I asked her what was wrong, she said, "The neighbor was making faces at me." Those words and the fear in my daughter's voice really put me on edge. I closed the curtains when I said goodnight. "Did you open them?" "Only a little, but it's because I heard a weird noise." Alicia couldn't recall exactly what she heard. According to her, she had gotten out of bed to see what was going on, and when she lifted the curtain, she saw a light on in the neighbor's window. The curtains in the back room had been drawn back, and our neighbor was standing in his house, right up against the window frame. What was he doing? Alicia thought for a moment, and then made an expression I never want to see on my child's face again. First, she smiled with both sets of teeth, then she furrowed her eyebrows. She inclined her head towards me, kind of Kubrick stare-esque, and strained the muscles in her neck. The worst part, though, was what she did with her hands. She held out her left arm, forearm up. Then she clenched her right hand into a fist and moved it back and forth rapidly over her forearm. Poor Thing described it as playing the violin, but it seemed pretty obvious to me that my neighbor was pantomiming cutting. Disturbed, I told Alicia to stop. I was angry and confused. My neighbor, a man in his 40s, was a bit of a recluse, but he had seemed normal enough in the 3 or 4 times I'd spoken to him. I couldn't fathom why he would do something like that to my kids. My last question to Alicia was if our neighbor had made any other gestures, and she nodded. Then she started making beckoning, come here, motions with both of her hands. I had Alicia sleep in my room for the night as well. I also checked out the window in my kids' room, but like before, I saw nothing. The next morning, after dropping the kids off at school, I spent a good 5 minutes knocking on my neighbor's front door. I figured he was home since his car was in the driveway, but he never answered. Eventually, I had to leave for work, and as I was walking away, I turned around quickly. He was the coward. I saw him for a split second at the front window before he ducked out of view. That same night, I put a plan in motion. While my kids slept in my room, I hung out in theirs. It was a Friday night, and I was ready to pull an all-nighter. I sat on the floor under the window in their room and started marathoning midnight mass on my phone, keeping the volume low. At midnight, I started to hear strange sounds. It was this low, repeated clicking sound. You know the CHK sound you make to beckon a horse? It was something like that. After a few minutes, the sound switched to what I think was supposed to be a whistle, but it came out all wrong, like someone sucking breath in through their teeth. Certain that the neighbor was at his window, I stood up and pulled the curtain back in one motion. I saw him right away. There was a dim light on in his room, allowing me to see that horrible expression Alicia had made. His window was indeed open, and his arms were stuck out into the cold night, violently swiping against each other. When he saw me and realized that he was looking at another grown man and not some poor child, he stopped. His cartoonish grin faded, and another, more genuine emotion settled over his features: rage. The man grabbed the window and slammed it shut. I sat on the floor for a minute, my blood thundering in my ears. Just as I was about to pull out my phone to call the cops, I heard a tremendous smack against the glass of the bedroom window. I pulled the curtain back again. No lights, no one outside, but I saw a handprint in the top corner of the window pane. That window is very tall. The man outside would have needed an insane vertical to get his hand up there. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. As I explained the situation, I went to my bedroom, locked the doors, and took my handgun out of the safe. My heart was beating out of my chest, but I knew I had to stay calm, even more so when I saw that Alicia was awake and looking at me. I whispered that we were okay, but we had to stay very quiet. I sat on the edge of my bed, my firearm ready. After what felt like an eternity, I saw something. The moonlight was bright enough that I could see a silhouette through the white curtains. The dark shape became more clear as the man outside stepped closer to the window. Somehow, he knew which room we were in. Then, something happened that I couldn't entirely wrap my head around. The man stepped back from the glass and raised his arms, making a Y shape. Only, his arms were far too long. They seemed to be double the length that they should have been. I could clearly see 2 hands at the ends, 5 fingers on each hand, flopping around as the man brought his arms closer to the window. Thud, thud, thud. I stood up, ready to shoot, but just then the sounds of sirens pierced the night. The man outside banged his hands against the window one last time, and then it was as if someone had sliced his arms at the elbows. His forearms seemed to shear right off, and the man took off running before they so much as hit the ground. When the police officers announced themselves, I answered the door. They told me to stay inside while they investigated the neighbor's house. I watched them knock, and When no one answered, they tried the front door handle. I watched the unlocked door swing open. The two looked at one another and then entered. I'm not sure what they found inside that house. All I know is that when they emerged a few moments later, they both looked very disturbed. When I went outside to ask what they had found, the female officer told me simply, "Your neighbor's dead." The rest of the night was a blur. At one point, I wandered to the side of the house and found several people photographing something on the ground outside my bedroom window. Before they could ask me to leave, I made out the gruesome shape of two human arms. The kids and I have been staying in my parents' apartment for months. We can't stay in the house. Alicia is way too traumatized for that. I want to sell the damn house, but our story going semi-viral is making that difficult. After all, who would want a house that, thanks to the news, has become permanently associated with phrases like dismemberment and days of torture and victim barely recognizable as human?